What do you think it is that has led to, in the last, let's say, 15-ish, 20 maybe years, to this level of hostility? Um, I mean, obviously, someone's profiting off of it, right? And they always say, follow the money. So, who is it that is benefiting from all of this cross-cultural hostility?
A lot of this stuff is complicated and not easy to answer. This one is real easy to answer. It's the 1%. It's private equity. It's this demographic of people. I mean, I've seen varying statistics, but roughly 50% of all of the money in the United States of America is in the hands of less than 2,000 people. There are billions of us. And out of billions, you've got less than 2,000 who control and own and dictate over half of all of it. We have not seen this level of concentration of wealth since before the Great Depression. And where did that get us? Oh, right. Robber barons and workers being shut into factories and dying, and like the Great Depression. And there were millionaires that were made in the Great Depression, just over the last few months. Like I manage my own investments, and it's been really interesting to watch over the last few months here. There have been some policy decisions that made and some decrees and edicts that have been dictated from on high that have sent the stock market into turmoil. Now, if you're a working class person who's looking at your 401k, you just saw it lose like 30% of its value in 3 months, and it's now starting to recover, okay? And if you are, let's say, a working class like trader, just part-time for funsies, you probably could have made some money off of it, because there are ways to make money on the stock when it goes down or when it goes up. But at the end of the day, even if I had a couple of grand sitting around and I could have capitalized upon that by shorting the market, okay, which is basically betting that the market is going to go down, and then you profit off of how accurate bet was. It's an oversimplification, but if I had a couple $1,000s I could have thrown at that, I could have made 30% on that bet, okay? But what's 30% of a couple thousand? It's nothing. But those 2,000 people who control 50% of the nation's wealth, okay, 30% on a $15 million bet is more money than you and I are going to make in our lifetime, okay? So you've got this demographic of people who, whether the streets are burning, the economy is collapsing, 2008, now dot-com bubble, doesn't matter. They're making money hand over fist, okay? And then when the stock market's doing well and your 401k is doing great, they're doing even better, okay? And this group of people, although they bankroll media organizations that wave our flag and try to appeal to our patriotism and our sense of community, at the end of the day, that's something that in all of my travels all over this country, in my associations with people across the economic spectrum and across the cultural spectrum, that we all agree that the billionaires and the millionaires that exist in such concentration, in such numbers, to such a degree, is a problem. And their ability to influence and buy our politics and our politicians is a problem. That is something I've yet to meet anybody who disagrees with that, regardless of what color flag, blue or red, that they wave. This group of people has no allegiance to this country or your community. Because if things get really bad here, they hop on their private jet and they fly to Dubai and they wait it out. And they profit on the way down. And then when the rebuilding happens, they're the ones that are selling the lumber. They're the ones that are manufacturing the trucks. And when I say manufacturing, I mean they're sitting on the board of executives. The ones that actually manufacture the trucks are guys like me with calluses on our hands. The ones who are actually filing the paperwork and getting and drawing up the contracts are people like you, people who are lashed to a cubicle or an office all day. We are the ones that do the actual work. But these people control all of the resources, and because they control all of the resources, they get to dictate what goes on. And so, as they have accumulated wealth and power, they have channeled that power into influence, not just by buying politicians and bankrolling their campaigns, but by also purchasing up media outlets. Jeff Bezos purchased, was it New York Times? Washington Post, one of the oldest, most storied newspapers. And there have been cases where they have stopped covering certain things because of Jeff Bezos' financial interests.
He was actually, the paper was set to endorse Kamala Harris in the last election, and Bezos
Right.
shot that down.
Whatever you think of that, right? Whether it was endorsing Harris or endorsing Trump, at the end of the day, the guy who owns the paper, and I know I can hear it in my head right now. There are people who are going to say, well, he owns it, he can do what he wants with it. Media, they say that we have, what is it, supposed to have 3 co-equal branches of government, that you've got the executive branch, you've got the legislative branch, and you have the judicial branch. But there's been many writings going back to the founding of the country where the news, the media, is also an essential component for a functioning democracy.
Yes, it's called the Fourth Estate. Yes.
And the idea is that if we are going to govern ourselves, if we are going to elect people to run the show for us, okay, then we should probably know what we're talking about. And how do we, the people who are growing the food and plowing the fields and hauling the materials and getting the paperwork done and making sure that the food is cooked and hits the table on time, and the ones that keep the world going, right? How are we supposed to know what is the best course for society unless we have good information to go off of? How do you, if your car is having problems, how do you know what's wrong unless you have good diagnosis of whatever the problem might be, right? And that is the role that media is supposed to play in a healthy and functioning democracy. And the problem is, and I wish I knew the exact legislation and laws that were passed. It was in, I want to say it was in the 80s or 90s, when the rules governing media were changed. The idea that any idea had to have an equal amount of hearing on both sides. But one of the other changes that happened is that there was a time when editorial, which is, here's the day's news events, and this is my personal take on the day's news events and what you should think of it. That was called editorial, and it had its own spot. All the rest of the news was just, on this day, this thing happened, these were the parties involved, this is what their spokespeople said. And that was it. And you, as the citizen of a democracy, use that information to make decisions about who was the best candidate or what was a policy that you were concerned about or you didn't think it was going to be a good idea. But we have lived through a time where those guardrails, those guiding principles around media and news were taken away. So now what we have in its place is media organizations that, at the end of the day, they are for-profit organizations. They have a legal, and I'm going to use a fancy word here, fiduciary. Like if you ever need financial advice, don't go to a financial planner, go to a fiduciary. They are legally bound contractually to look out for your best interests. And if they don't, you can hold them legally accountable. We have a similar system within our economic and our business organizational structure that if you sit on the board of directors of a corporation, you have a fiduciary, a legally binding obligation to make sure that that organization and that company shows a return on its investment. It has to grow, it has to grow, it has to grow. Which is a whole other subject we will get into at another time. In the case of media, originally, media was considered what was called a loss leader. It wasn't about making money for the stations. They did it for the prestige. Everybody wanted their news anchors to be looked at. Think of the golden days. You got Dan Rather and or Ted Koppel, and I can't remember the other guy on the other network.
Well, Walter Cronkite and I know who you're talking about. He was ABC. Peter Jennings.
Peter Jennings, yeah. So the golden age when there was only this was when those guardrails were still in place, and it wasn't about making money for those stations. It was considered a societal obligation, that it was considered a good for the democracy. And even though we had left and we had right and we had divisions and we had disagreements, there was far more civility. Nobody was talking about the possibility of civil war in 1980 something, okay, or in the 70s, okay.
Well, there also wasn't right-wing and left-wing media. There was just
media. There was
the
just
facts.
media. And it was when those things got stripped away that you started, first it started with right-wing media, but then the left came in to counteract or counterbalance. But what has happened over the time, and again, this brings us back to the whole point about like what happened to our conversations as people, is that now instead of having two sides who are just presenting facts as they are, you have sides. One is saying that this is how life is, and these are the threats to you. And the other side is saying, no, this is how life is, and those are the threats. And the whole reason it's being done is because if they can keep you upset, sitting on the edge of your seat, every day is a cliffhanger. What will the Dems do next? What will the Republicans do next? What will Nancy Pelosi say next? What will Donald Trump say next? It keeps you angry and full of anxiety. And the way they do this is by taking all of these cultural issues and turning up the volume on them because they're so deeply tied to our emotions and our feelings about self and identity and community. And then they amplify the differences from different people in different communities and portray them as active, ongoing threats to you and your well-being.
And stoking that division keeps the media companies in business. It keeps the political parties making more and more, exponentially more money every election cycle. But nobody seems to be thinking about that.
And at the end of the day, everything we're talking about, see, we've even done it right here in the real time. We're talking about the media, we're talking about the cultural differences, we're talking about the money, we're talking about this. What aren't we talking about? And what we aren't talking about is exactly what they don't want us to talk about. When I say they, I'm talking about those 2,000 people that control the media outlets, that control where money flows, and they sit on the board of directors of all the Fortune 500 companies. They're the ones that control private equity. What they don't want us talking about is class solidarity. And I know that's a loaded term for some people, but at the end of the day, the right-wing guy with a gorgeous collection of ARs and a big pickup truck has a lot more in common with the eco-gardening, Prius-driving barista, right? That their economic interests are more closely aligned than the economic interests of any of us and a Jeff Bezos or a Koch brothers or a George Soros. And it's funny, we can mention these names like Jeff Bezos and the Koch brothers and Soros and whoever else we want to mention. The real threat to American democracy and our way of life are the names we don't even know. The old money people, the ones who make guys like Jeff Bezos seem like small money because, yeah, Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk are competing for world's wealthiest man. But the real power are the ones that are like halfway down that list, okay?
Dark money guys.
The ones who don't want their name on in the face on a cover of a magazine. The ones who are perfectly happy to have breakfast in, Europe and lunch in the Middle East and then next day have breakfast in New York because they're busy making deals. They're busy buying politicians. They're busy going from one board meeting to the other board meeting saying, no, we're going to make sure that this product is cheap and falls apart so that our other subsidiary over here can get their profits up or whatever. Every single human life on this planet is nothing more than a chess piece on a board, and we're all just pawns, and they just move us around. And a guy like Jeff Bezos or the Soroses, they might, there might be a rook, or they might be I don't know, a knight. Okay. But at the end of the day, the king and the queens are the ones we never hear anything about. We're never talking about. But if you don't think that they're the ones who are dictating the laws that gets passed, the legislation that gets passed, the narratives that make it into the media, and the conversations that we are or are not allowed to have, they are the ones. And the reason they do it is because as long as we're atomized and divided and splintering ourselves along any fucking line that they can contrive to divide us amongst, largely cultural, then we don't come together and recognize that our interests down here are aligned, and we are the ones who are divided while they're united. And the longer we're divided, the more dysfunctional our politics get.